Working with Trent Booth and the Veritas Leadership Group over the last decade has unlocked things within me that I never knew existed until they were coached out of me. If you're listening and you feel stuck or like you have another gear that you're having a hard time getting to, Trent's offering a free intro call to any of our listeners. I love Veritas because it's an amazing combo of mentoring and coaching. I get what I need when I need it most. It's also a flat monthly rate, which is awesome for anyone looking to give it a shot with no contract and no long-term commitment. Schedule a call with Trent today by going to linktree/CSP60. That's linktr.ee/CSP60. That's linktree/CSP60 with a dot before the two E's. Thanks for joining us on the CSP Hot Hands 15 Minutes of Flames edition of the podcast. My name is Brett Wiggins, and I get to serve as your host. We know sometimes you don't have a full hour to soak in every moment from our 60 minutes of fire. So we've created a condensed version of highlights for each episode for you to be able to enjoy. Your 15 minutes of flames begin now. Let's do it. The events team is looking to go from $1 million in sales and make that jump to 2 million. And a lot of times in Vectron and Cutco, we're pretty unrealistic. Like doubling in a year is not something that most companies, like, you get laughed at for that a lot of places, but people do it here. So when you're looking at making that jump from $1 million to 2 million, what's the most common success factors that teams achieve to make that happen?
Good question. So I got a mental answer and then I got a tangible answer. So I think the first part mental is that I think you just have to understand that it is possible to go from 1 million to 2 million in 1 year, depending on your team situation. There are certain programs that have opportunities that can literally jump $1 million in sales. At the same time, though, I think that people have to also remember, like, hey, you also have to make fundamental, tangible changes that are going to serve you they're going to serve you different getting to a $2 million program versus a $1 million program. This is actually a great question for me personally, because I took over for Pat Sides and I took over for him about, I want to say 6 years ago. And he took over for Josh Mueller years before that. And so I'm like the luckiest like coordinator of all time, because I have like the greatest lineage ever. No offense to anyone else, but like going from Josh to Pato to me, like that's like super easy transition.
I don't
Like
think anybody's arguing with that, and if they do argue with it, then they'll get told to be quiet very quickly. So
tell them to kick rocks. It's fine. But the main thing is like Josh was like the pioneer, where he literally just imagined a forest and he just paved it down and then just cleared out all the trees. And then he had Pato come in and actually put the groundwork in the dirt. All I'm doing is just making the road look pretty, and I'm just making little adjustments as we go. And so there are things that we used to do, because I used to be Pato's assistant for a couple of years before I was coordinator. And Pato had a way of doing things. A lot of it I really liked, like the recruiting, the retention, the meetings, and all this other stuff. But when I was
Are you about to tell me that you changed some programs?
possibly so.
Oh,
I mean, it's
cut the recording. This guy's off the rails.
I know, blasphemy, right? But but I think very just openly just be aware of like doing a self audit of your program every year. And I think one of the hardest things that people do, and I've been guilty of this as well, is that when you get to a certain point with Cutco, you have to really challenge yourself consistently on being like, am I still the best version of myself, and am I still open minded to growing? Like, I've run into that roadblock before where I'm like, I think we're the best at this thing. And that may be true at one point in time. Getting to $1 million when I took over, because I took over right as Lone Star did $1 million 6 years ago. And that stuff was great, but I noticed a lot of things in there. I was like, we need to change these things. That's not going to get us to 2, and that's not going to get us to 3. And so it's like, okay, so we had to change the way we do meetings. I had to change the way I worked with reps. I had to implement workshops. I had to do all these other things. And just really just focus on volume. So this is a long answer, but here's the end of it, is one of the easiest formulas that we've always followed. So a lot of people don't know this, like we may not have a large single event, like a state fair type thing in our area. We used to have this event called the San Antonio Rodeo, did about 150K. We lost it. We're still trying to get it back. But even outside of that, I still believe that programs, if they just focus on recruiting a big team, retaining that team, and consistently never stop developing people into CSP status, you're going to naturally, just by pure volume and averages, be able to sell $2 or $3 million. Rising Sun's proving that right now. Rising Sun also doesn't have a large single event. They have like these Maricopa home shows. They've grown to like over 100K now, which is great. But they did $3 million last year, and they did like 400 or 500 events, and they have a large team. Their program is built very similar to ours. They just definitely outsold us last year. So I would just tell people, like, if you don't know where to start, are you good at your recruiting? Are you good with your retention? Are you actually good at developing your reps to get from baby status to CSP status? And do you have a system in place where people fully feel like they can grow, to where it doesn't feel unattainable, to where you have a tier system, you have a clear path of advancement, and then just be patient. There's a term I heard, I want to say about a year ago, that I've told a few people now. It's about having aggressive patience. And I think that's something that we forget along the way. Like, you can't just sit on your hands and just expect things to happen. Like the whole saying, good things come to those who wait. That's true to a degree, but it's mostly not in our business. And so I think people have to understand, like, work as hard as you can, do as much as you possibly can, but gosh dang it, you can't expect it to flip in 3 months. And so there's been DVMs that I've spoken to. They're like, all right, how do we make our CSP culture better? And I'm like, time. That's the first one. It's going to take time. The second thing is patience, and the third thing is love and support.
What can team members do to really better support their coordinators?
Don't be the problem. Making sure that whatever you're doing, I just had a conversation with one of our CSPs actually this last week, and I worked an event with them, and they have a different point of view on how we do a certain thing in our program. And I just remember telling them, like, they're like, I just don't agree with it. And I tried to, I hope someday you wake up, but ultimately this has been a conversation for years. And I just remember wrapping up the convo just saying, like, hey, as long as you're not bringing down the culture and you're not influencing people in a negative way, then we're good. Your concerns are valid. I totally get where you're coming from. But if your objective is to try and make a better culture with what we're doing right now, then don't be the reason why it goes backwards. Leveling up the conversation. So Brian Carter helped me out a lot with that, because we feel very strongly about standards and how to do things and stuff like that. But I think that over a period of time, I had to do a good job at just really making sure I gathered my thoughts before every conversation I knew was going to be challenging. And the hardest conversations to have those with are your close friends. And I've said now recently that the best thing and the worst thing about Cutco is that we're all friends. And so one of the hardest things to do as a coordinator is to play that balance beam between, am I still going to have a friend at the end of this conversation? And are they still going to respect me as their leader, as the coordinator? And I think DVMs run across this issue all the time. And so it just maybe doesn't get talked about that much, because DVMs obviously are like, they have to have hard conversations too, but how can they do it in a way where they don't basically push the rep or push the manager away? Not saying we're all not going to have moments of weakness. I have them too. If I get dealt a situation to me that is not on our books, like it's one of those situations it hasn't happened before, it has happened, we haven't added to the policy, right? So it's like, well, technically, Dante, they pull up their lawyer glasses. Technically, Dante, it's not in here.
In section 3, subpoint 2.
Exactly. I'm like, okay, are we playing Settlers of Catan right now? Are we lawyering? Like, what's going on here? But the main thing is like, hey, when someone brings me a conversation and it's not already in our policy document, I never make a decision during the first conversation. I try my hardest. Actually, I don't even try anymore. I do my darnest to not give in to the one side of the story. So usually when something gets dealt to me, it's usually from the rep more times than not. And regardless who brings it to me first, I find out, A, who all's involved. Okay, well, before anything happens, I have to talk to everyone, right? And so obviously I have conversations with everyone. I do my due diligence. The second thing is like, I sleep on it. And these are for the harder ones, right? The harder conversations. Mm-hmm. I sleep on it. And then I forgot to mention this during the intro and stuff like that. I'm a big nerd, Brett. Anything nerdy you can think of, I've been a part of it at some point in my life. And so one of the things I really love are the Marvel movies. And there's a movie called Infinity War,
Oh yeah.
and spoiler alert for anyone, just block out the audio right now. But there's a moment in that movie where Doctor Strange and all the Avengers, or most of the Avengers, are fighting Thanos, and then he does this whole thing where he like goes forward in time, like 14 million plus different outcomes, right? And then he finds the one that works. So this is the best way I can put this. I sleep on it. I think of all the different possible outcomes, good, positive, negative, and I try and think of the best possible outcome that benefits the program, not the individual.
How do you manage running an events team at the level you are and selling simultaneously? You sold over 300 grand last year for the year, and I think that gets overlooked. But you still run. That's my reminder to wrap up. But you run an amazing events team and you help a bunch of others. What would be your keys to doing those two things at the same time?
Um, Man, that's a tough one to answer.
Yeah.
This may sound cliche, I suppose, but I think I think just understanding that we can do more if you want to do more. I think that if people care about, if they are passionate about what they're doing and they're semi good at it, I think people would be amazed at what they can accomplish. Again, like I don't believe I'm the most talented rep by a mile, but I work hard enough. I have enough opportunity with my schedule at this point to be able to sell that much Cutco. I definitely could sell more Cutco personally if I really focused on that. But um, I just love consulting. I love being a coordinator, and I just love the people that I work with and what we're all about. When you get to a level of success, how do you handle it without imploding? How do you handle it without letting ego get in the way? How do you handle it without changing who you were to who you are now? And maybe that's the appropriate one to go with for right now, because I mentioned a little bit earlier in this from a previous question, like I kind of lost my way earlier this year,
Mm-hmm.
and some things have happened, and one of the main things that I'm really grateful for is just like is being able time to reflect on all this and just really understand like where did it all come from. I think sometimes everyone in this business, when they succeed at a certain level, sometimes develop, um, they lose track of themselves. And I think if we're talking about coordinators specifically as of right now, I think when coordinators are newer, they're very hungry and they're willing to grow and they're willing to do all these things. And then eventually what happens is, not for everyone, but eventually what could happen is you start to get really good at it and people start looking up to you. And then a lot of people start looking up to you, which is really ironic because I'm 5'4" and people look up to me. But the main thing is that whenever it comes to like the business side of things, um, it almost got to a point where I felt like I had to be perfect. And because a lot of people would reach out about a bunch of random things all the time. And I was so happy to respond to people right away. And I think our between the two programs, we did 3.9 million last year in event sales. And that's a lot of CPO. And I think at some point, like we all start to implode a little bit for different reasons. So like some of the coordinators are on this call right now, or the coordinators are listening to it right now. If you get to a certain point, are you going to be able to are you going to hold to your promise of sticking to your values that you told yourself you would have 5 years ago? And if you feel like you're not going to maintain those values that you set for yourself 5 years from now, you might be heading down a path of like not being in the right role. Maybe you're in that position because you have to be, because your team needs you there as a placeholder. But I think if people really are honest with themselves and being like, hey, these are core fundamental values that I am never going to waver on. So maybe that's the way to put it. These are core fundamental values as a coordinator and as a person I'm not going to waver on, no matter what. And my ideas will change, my philosophies will change over time. But as long as my core values are not disrupted and I don't compromise them, then I think I'm going to be in a good place 5, 10, 20 years from now. Because at the end of the day, we only have our word, we only have our values, we only have our character and our integrity and stuff like that. Everyone's going to have problems and issues and stuff like that. But I think the question you should have asked me is probably, how do you deal with large amounts of success? And I would say the better question is, how do you maintain your values and your integrity whenever you do become successful? How about that?
If you're still tracking and categorizing all your own expenses, I have a message from your CPA. Stop. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are your goals include growing your sales. And one way to do that is delegating admin responsibilities by trading time for money. Rising Stock and MyBooks.pro is exactly what you need. Rising Stock is an all-encompassing financial tracking and coaching program, where MyBooks.pro is exactly what it sounds like. They just do your books. You can choose to just have them track your expenses or take advantage of everything they have to offer. Do your business and your CPA a favor by scheduling a free intro call today at linktree/CSP60. That's linktr.ee/CSP60. That's linktree/CSP60 with a dot before the two E's. Thanks for listening, and for some of you watching, I want to remind you that all resources from today can be found at linktree/CSP60. That's linktr.ee/CSP60. That's linktree/CSP60 with a dot before the EE. If you want to be a member of our live Zoom audience for one of our upcoming shows, email bwiggins@vectormarketing.com. That's BWIGGINS@vectormarketing.com. If you loved what you heard today, I'd be honored if you followed, subscribed, or even rated us on whatever platform you use to find your 60 minutes of fire. We'll see you next time.